The house always smelled of rosewood and memory. Even now, years after Father's death, I still expect to hear his voice echo from the corridor, deep, commanding, patient in the way thunder is before rain. He built everything around us with discipline and vision, but what he left behind was not just wealth. It was war disguised as inheritance. I live with my sister, Sophie, in the mansion he left us. To outsiders, we are the Harrison sisters, poised, beautiful, women of class and legacy. But inside these white walls, the air is always tense, as if the house itself resents the sound of our voices. Sophie was born of lightning, I of restraint. She burns, I hold. That has always been our way. This morning, the house felt unusually silent, a kind of silence that comes before words that can't be taken back. I found her at the dining table, scrolling through her phone, humming to herself. She was dressed like she had somewhere to go, always somewhere to go, while I sat in my pressed white shirt, already buried under work emails. She looked up at me and smiled, that sharp little smile that never reached her eyes. "You look tired, Ellen." "I've been working," I said. "Working," she repeated, like it was a curse. "You make it sound holy." I wanted to ignore her, but the words settled in my chest like smoke. For Sophie, work was a chain. For me, it was the only thing that kept me from falling apart. She dropped her phone, leaned forward, and said the sentence that cracked the morning open. "I want my share of the company." At first, I thought she was joking. I even laughed a little, but Sophie's face didn't move. Her voice was calm, the way people sound when they've already made up their minds. "I'm serious, Ellen. I want my half. I want to live my life without asking for your permission." Something inside me went still. I could feel the air shift, heavy and electric. "Sophie," I said softly, "this company isn't just numbers and paper. It's Father's legacy. You can't just cut it in half because you feel restless." Her laugh was short, sharp, the sound of glass against glass. "I'm not restless, Ellen. I'm suffocating. You've turned our father's gift into a leash." I wanted to scream that she was wrong, that I was only trying to keep us from losing everything. But I saw something wild in her eyes, something that no reason could touch. She stood, brushing crumbs off her silk dress, perfume thick in the air. "Over my dead body will I live like this," she said. I didn't mean to answer the way I did. The words just escaped, quiet but cold. "Then be ready to die for it." She froze. For a heartbeat, we stared at each other. Two daughters bound by the same blood, poisoned by the same love. Then she laughed again, soft and cruel, and walked away. When the door closed behind her, I felt the house exhale. The clock ticked once, twice, and I realized something terrifying. It wasn't the company she wanted to break. It was me. Work had become my refuge. The more Sophie drifted toward chaos, the deeper I buried myself in ledgers, meetings, and silence. It was easier that way to focus on balance sheets, rather than the imbalance in our blood. That was the day he arrived. Jack. He stood outside the reception, with the unsure posture of someone trying not to be noticed. A neatly pressed shirt, sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal the kind of strength that hides quietly in a man's arms. When I looked at him through the glass, I expected indifference, but his gaze lifted, steady and unguarded. For a second, I forgot what I was about to say. My assistant, nervous and overeager, rushed to introduce him. "Madam, this is the new driver. He's been waiting 2 weeks for your approval." 2 weeks. In this city, patience is rare. That alone said something. "Name?" I asked. Jack Anthony, ma'am." His voice was low, calm, neither desperate nor proud. I nodded toward the chair opposite my desk. He sat, careful not to touch anything. It was the kind of caution I respected. "You're a degree holder," I said, glancing at his resume. "Why apply to drive cars?" He smiled, not embarrassed, simply honest. "I've been looking for something stable. I'd rather move forward than stand still." There was something clean about the way he spoke. Simple, without the usual Lagos performance. 5 years experience, I asked. Yes, ma'am, I can handle long routes, late hours, difficult employers. He said it lightly, as if daring me to test him. I wanted to. Instead, I handed the papers back. Report to the chief driver for a test. If you pass, start tomorrow at 7. He stood and thanked me with quiet sincerity that unsettled me more than charm ever could. When he left, the room felt slightly off balance, like something had shifted a few inches, and I hadn't noticed until it was gone. By the next morning, Jack was at the gate before dawn. The guard said he'd been waiting since 6. I watched him from the balcony, his uniform pressed, his posture straight, a faint line of steam rising from his coffee cup as he stood beneath the rain. Reliable, predictable, safe, at least, that's what I thought. Weeks passed. Sophie stopped coming to the office altogether. She spent her days in boutiques and champagne bars, floating through the city like she owned its air. I tried to ignore the gossip, the whispers about her spending, her lovers, her late-night arrivals in my car. Yes, my car. I'd once caught the scent of her perfume in the back seat, the faint trace of red lipstick on the rim of a forgotten water bottle. Jack said nothing about it, and neither did I. Still, I watched him. He was polite but distant, efficient without being mechanical. When he opened the car door, his eyes always met mine, not like a man admiring his boss, but like someone studying weather before it breaks. There was no flirtation, just a strange stillness between us that words would ruin. One evening, I left the office late. The rain had stopped, and the streets glowed with streetlight halos. Jack stood by the car, the engine already running, music low, a jazz tune from an old Nigerian station, all brass and melancholy. As I sat in the back, I noticed his hands on the wheel, clean, scarred, human, the kind of hands that had worked for things and lost them too. Rough day, he asked, eyes still on the road. I don't know why I answered him. Maybe it was the hour, maybe the exhaustion. Every day feels rough lately. He didn't reply right away. Then, softly, you work too hard. Some things break from being held too tight. I looked up sharply. Are you talking about the car or me? His smile flickered in the mirror. Sometimes they're the same thing. I should have dismissed it, but his words stayed. They followed me into my dreams that night, through the corridors of the house, through the echo of my father's voice, through Sophie's laughter behind locked doors. The next morning, Sophie came home drunk before dawn. Her dress glittered like broken promises. She stumbled into the living room and dropped her purse, bills and credit cards spilling like confetti across the marble floor. You're awake, she slurred, smirking at me. Still working. Someone has too, I said. She leaned against the wall, eyes half open, voice honeyed with cruelty. Tell me, Ellen, do you ever feel lonely in your perfect world? I didn't answer. I couldn't, because for the first time in years, I did. And that loneliness had a name. The next few days blurred together, meetings, silence, and the quiet hum of the car engine beneath the rain. Jack never spoke unless spoken to, but sometimes I caught him watching the road like he was remembering something that hurt. There was a gravity in him I didn't understand. And then, one evening, I found him in the garden, fixing one of the broken security lights. The sun was low, soft gold against the red earth. He looked up when I called his name, light catching in his eyes. Madam, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. Didn't mean to intrude. I should have left then. I should have gone back inside, but something in the stillness held me there. You're not intruding, I said quietly. I've just never seen you smile. He paused. I do, sometimes. Just not when people are watching. I don't know what possessed me, but I smiled back. For the first time in years, it didn't feel forced. That night, I sat awake, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the rain began again, soft, deliberate, endless. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just tired, that men like him come and go, and women like me never let them stay. But somewhere between the sound of thunder and the whisper of the garden light flickering back on, I realized something that made my pulse heighten. It wasn't the company Sophie wanted to break anymore. It was the silence inside me. And Jack had just put a crack through it. I went to work early, trying to lose myself in contracts and phone calls, but my mind wandered always back to that moment in the garden. The way Jack had looked at me, not as an employer, not as a woman to be admired, but as if he saw something quiet and lonely that even I had stopped acknowledging. That frightened me more than it should have. I'd built my life on control, every schedule tight, every expense documented, every emotion folded neatly and kept out of sight. Control was safety. Control was love translated into order. But one simple glance from a man who fixed car engines and garden lights had undone something I didn't even know I'd defastened shut. Sophie was still asleep when I left home that morning, her champagne bottles lining the counter like tiny glass soldiers. She lived in excess and motion, as if staying still might expose the hollowness beneath her laughter. I used to envy her freedom. Now I pitied it. She didn't come to the office anymore. When clients asked after her, I said she was overseeing external partnerships. It was easier to lie than to explain that my sister was too busy burning the candle from both ends just to feel its heat. But the truth was, Sophie didn't care about the company, or our father's name, or legacy. She cared about wanting, always wanting. I thought I was nothing like her, until Jack. He began to linger in the corners of my day. Not deliberately, never that, but in small, persistent ways that felt like coincidence at first. An opened car door before I reached it, a faint scent of soap and engine grease when I passed through the garage. A quiet good morning that sounded almost like a promise. I found myself listening for the sound of his footsteps, measuring my breathing when he was near. One afternoon, we were caught in traffic on 3rd Mainland Bridge. The air was thick, hot, restless. He rolled down his window slightly, and the wind carried in the smell of salt water and exhaust. Without looking at me, he said, "You ever wonder what Lagos would sound like if everyone stopped pretending?" I turned toward him. "Pretending what?" He smiled faintly. "That we're all fine." I wanted to laugh at the simplicity of it, but instead, I felt the truth sink under my skin. I was tired of pretending, tired of acting like I wasn't breaking piece by piece. Every day I lived beside Sophie. Every night I slept in Father's house that had long stopped feeling like home. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive, but when I got out, his eyes followed me in the mirror, and for a moment, I almost turned back. It happened weeks later, the way most irreversible things do, quietly, without warning. Sophie had been gone for 2 days. She came home the 3rd night with the scent of foreign cologne clinging to her skin and a strange light in her eyes. She hummed as she passed me in the hall, as if the air around her pulsed to some private rhythm I couldn't hear. I should have asked where she'd been. Instead, I went to my room and stared out the window, watching the faint silhouette of Jack washing the car under the moonlight. The water glinted on his arms like moving glass. The night was too quiet. My heart wasn't. When he looked up and saw me watching, I didn't move. For a long moment, neither of us did. Then he gave a small nod, not of greeting, but recognition. Something in that look felt dangerous. I closed the curtain, but it was too late. Something had already begun. The next morning, I overheard the staff whispering in the kitchen. Laughter, muffled voices, the clink of mugs. "Madam Sophie entered Madam's car again last night," one of them said. Another giggled. "Maybe she no day like her own driver again." I stepped into the doorway, and silence spread like a slap. They scattered, their excuses clumsy and trembling. I said nothing. But as I walked back to my office, the truth struck me cold. Sophie and Jack, it wasn't jealousy that burned in me, it was betrayal, not just by her, but by the thin thread of hope I'd allowed myself to feel. I waited until evening before confronting him. He was checking the tires when I found him in the driveway, sleeves rolled, his shirt damp with sweat. The sky was bruised with sunset. "Jack," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. "Calm, almost kind. He looked up, wiped his hands, and nodded. "Ma'am." I took a step closer. "Did Sophie ask you to drive her last night?" He hesitated. That pause was enough. "Yes," he said finally. "She needed a ride home, she was." "Unwell, unwell," I repeated softly. "And what exactly did you cure?" His face hardened, but his voice stayed level. "I'm your employee, not your confessor." The words hit like a slap, not for their rudeness, but their truth. I turned away before he could see the heat rising behind my eyes. When I reached my room, I shut the door and leaned against it, trembling not from anger, but from something far more dangerous, the realization that I cared. I had let myself care. That night, I heard them. Laughter carried faintly through the corridor, the soft creak of the guest room door. I told myself it was my imagination, that it was the wind, that it was anything else but what it was, but the silence that followed was worse. I lay awake until morning, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of every decision that had ever led me here to this house, this company, this life built on order, while everything beneath it smoldered. Sophie had always loved taking what was mine. But this time, she hadn't just taken a man. She'd taken the last unbroken thing inside me. When dawn finally came, the house was still. I walked past the guest room and paused. The door was slightly open. Inside, the sheets were tangled, and Sophie's perfume clung to the air like smoke. My reflection caught in the mirror, hair undone, eyes hollow. I didn't cry. Tears were for things that could be fixed. Downstairs, I found the newspaper untouched on the table. The headline spoke of rising markets and political storms, but I couldn't focus. My world had already tilted. From the window, I saw Jack loading the car, movements measured, impersonal. He didn't look toward the house, didn't look up at my window. And in that moment, I knew. The fire had started. And I was standing in a house made of glass. The days that followed felt like moving through smoke, everything visible but impossible to touch. The house had grown quieter, heavier. Even the walls seemed to lean closer, as though listening for what would happen next. Sophie floated through it all as if nothing had changed. She hummed in the mornings, poured wine before noon, and left lipstick stains on the rim of every glass she touched. If she noticed the way I avoided her, she didn't care, or perhaps she enjoyed it. Sophie always fed on reaction. Silence was never enough punishment for her. She needed to see the crack. I, on the other hand, said nothing. I wore my calm-like armor. At the office, I signed documents and smiled at clients. At home, I existed, ate without tasting, slept without dreaming. But grief, even the kind that hides behind dignity, has a scent, and I carried it everywhere. Jack avoided me now, not obviously, not rudely, but with the kind of precision that only guilt can perfect. He opened doors without meeting my eyes, drove in silence, parked the car before I could say thank you. It was worse than confrontation. His silence was proof. One evening, I found myself watching him again. The way his shoulders moved when he carried things, the quiet grace of someone who had lived many small lives and learned how to survive each one. There was no arrogance in him, only a quiet sorrow that mirrored my own. And for a terrible moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. Then I saw Sophie standing by the doorway, watching me watch him. Her smile was soft, satisfied. It was the smile of someone who'd already won. A week later, she announced she'd be taking a short break. To where? I asked. Keeping my tone even, she shrugged. Does it matter? You have the company, I have life. She turned to Jack, who was standing nearby, pretending not to listen. You'll drive me. It wasn't a request. Something inside me flinched, but I forced myself to not. Fine, I said. Take him, take everything. Sophie's eyes gleamed. I already did. And just like that, she was gone, the sound of her heels fading through the marble corridor, the echo of a door slamming behind her, the quiet hum of the car as it drove away. I stood there long after the dust had settled, staring at the empty driveway, wondering what part of me she'd drive into the ground next. That night, I went to Father's study. I hadn't entered that room in months, not since the funeral. The air was stale, heavy with old books and old ghosts. His portrait hung above the desk, eyes stern even in death. "You said legacy was love," I whispered. "But you never said love could rot." For the first time, I didn't feel anger towards Sophie. I felt something colder, pity mixed with exhaustion. We were both Father's daughters, after all. Both raised in a house that taught us how to win, not how to heal. I stayed there until dawn, staring at the first light cutting through the curtains. By the time the sun rose, I had made a decision. If Sophie wanted to play with fire, I would let her burn. 2 weeks later, she came back. No announcement this time. No laughter, no perfume. Just the quiet thud of her suitcase against the floor and the distant sound of her heels in the corridor. I didn't go to meet her. I wanted her to come to me, to see if she could still speak without turning everything she touched to ash. When she finally appeared at the doorway to my office, she looked different, paler, quieter. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes, like bruises from sleepless nights. "Back already?" I asked, not looking up from my laptop. She hesitated. "You missed me, did I?" Her smile faltered. "Ellen, But before she could finish, Jack entered behind her, carrying her bags. His face was unreadable, his presence heavy in the room. The air between us crackled with something that wasn't quite anger anymore, something darker, deeper, nameless. "You can leave them by the door," I said. He obeyed. And for the first time since everything began, he met my eyes again. I don't know what I expected to see there. Guilt, maybe, regret. But what I saw instead was a question. A quiet, desperate kind of searching. It was Sophie who broke the silence. "Ellen," she said softly, "Jack and I are getting married." The words fell into the room, glass shattering on marble. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, not because of surprise. I had always known she would go this far, but because of how calm my body felt in the face of it. I'd thought pain would come like fire. Instead, it came like ice. I stood, walked around the desk, and stopped in front of her. "Congratulations," I said quietly. She blinked, uncertain. "That's it." I smiled, a small, brittle thing. "What else is there to say?" "You've won." Her lip trembled slightly. "It's not about winning." "Then what is it about, Sophie?" "Love," I laughed, soft and bitter. "You don't love him. You just needed to prove you could take something from me again." Her voice rose, shaking. "You think you're so pure, Ellen. You think control makes you good. But you're worse than I am. At least I feel things. You only bury them until they rot." She turned and left before I could respond. Jack lingered a second longer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I didn't mean for any of this." I met his eyes. "Didn't you?" He looked away. When they were gone, the silence left behind was almost holy. The wedding was small. I didn't attend. I read about it in the papers, one of those glossy society columns that make tragedy sound like celebration. The Harrison heiress weds her family's driver in a private ceremony. People whispered. The company's board murmured about reputation, about scandal. I let them murmur, because beneath the embarrassment, beneath the rage, there was something else, a strange, liberating emptiness. For the first time in years, I felt nothing. And nothing felt almost like peace, until the call came. It was a month after the wedding, late evening, the kind of dusk that turns the city purple. My phone rang once, twice, 3 times before I answered. A voice I didn't recognize said, "Madam Ellen, you need to come to the hospital. It's about your sister." And just like that, the emptiness shattered. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and sorrow. That sharp, sterile scent that clings to your clothes and follows you home, no matter how many times you wash your hands. The lights were too white, too honest. Every sound, a cough, a distant cry, the steady pulse of machines, felt like a reminder that something sacred was dying. When I reached the reception, I didn't even remember how I'd driven there. The nurse looked up, recognition flickering in her eyes, the way pity does when it meets wealth. "Madam Harrison." I nodded, barely. Room 207. The hallway stretched endlessly, my heels echoing against the tiles like a heartbeat trying to outrun itself. When I opened the door, the room was dim, a curtain half drawn, shadows moving like ghosts. Sophie lay on the bed, her skin pale, her lips cracked, 4 tubes snaking from her arm, the roots of some frail, dying tree. For a moment, I thought she was asleep. Then her eyes opened. "Ellen." Her voice was thin, frayed around the edges. I stood there, frozen, unable to cross the small space between us. "What happened?" I asked finally, though my voice didn't sound like mine. She tried to smile, but it broke halfway. "Life happened." I wanted to be cruel, to tell her she'd brought this on herself, that she'd wanted chaos and found it. But her body, the fragility of it, the tremor in her hands, silenced me. "Where's Jack?" I asked. Her gaze shifted toward the window. "Gone." "Gone where?" Her fingers twisted the bed sheet. "He left after the accident." My stomach tightened. "Accident." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down the sides of her face. "We fought. I don't even remember what about. Maybe everything, maybe nothing." He said he was tired. He took the car and didn't come back. Outside, thunder rolled, far away, but close enough to make the glass tremble. I stood there, staring at her, 1,000 questions burning in my throat, but none finding their way out. Because beneath the anger, beneath the hurt, something unfamiliar was blooming. Fear. For the first time in our lives, Sophie looked breakable, and I realized I wasn't ready to lose her. No matter how much I'd claimed I wanted distance. She stayed in the hospital for 3 days. I came every morning, bringing her fresh flowers. She barely noticed. I answered her calls to the nurse, wiped her forehead when she shivered. We didn't talk about Jack. We didn't talk about the company or father or the years between us that had turned to ash. On the 3rd evening, she turned her face toward me and whispered, "Do you hate me?" I froze. "Sometimes," I said. "But not tonight." Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean to take him from you." "Yes, you did." She nodded, weakly. "Yes, I did. And I thought it would make me feel alive. But he wasn't what I thought. He was kind. Until he wasn't." A chill moved through me. "What do you mean?" She looked away. "He wanted more than I could give. He said I reminded him of someone he lost. He started drinking. And then." She trailed off, shaking her head. "I didn't push, not yet." When I left the hospital that night, the city was drowning in rain. The wipers scraped against the glass like impatient fingers. I kept seeing his face in the reflections, Jack's eyes, steady and unreadable. I told myself he was gone, that he had moved on to another city, another woman, another life. But something in Sophie's voice lingered, the way she said, "Until he wasn't." There are silences that hold stories. Hers was one of them. 2 nights later, Sophie was discharged. I brought her home myself. She didn't protest when I carried her bags into the house. For the first time in years, we shared the same room in peace, not sisters, not rivals, just tired women who had finally run out of energy to fight. The house was quieter than I remembered. Dust had gathered on the stair rails, and the chandeliers flickered with the faint pulse of unstable electricity. Sophie walked slowly toward Father's portrait and stared at it for a long time. "Do you think he'd be proud of us?" "No," I said honestly. She smiled, thinly. "Me neither." The call came the next morning. It was the police. A car had been found at the edge of a river, half submerged. Jack's car, no driver, no body. Just a wallet with his ID and a photograph of me. My hands shook as I held the phone. The officer's voice blurred into static. I hung up without answering. Sophie was in the kitchen when I found her. She was making tea, her movements slow, deliberate, like someone walking through a dream. "He's gone," I said. She didn't ask who, she already knew. "I told you," she whispered. "He wanted more." "What did he want, Sophie?" Her eyes lifted, glassy and distant. "He wanted to be saved." She turned back to her cup, her hands trembling. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps, every gust of wind like a voice calling from far away. I sat by the window until morning, watching the rain erase the world one drop at a time. Days passed, the police found nothing else. The river swallowed its secrets as easily as the past had swallowed ours. Sophie began to recover, or pretend to. She started painting again. Bright strokes of red and gold splashed across the canvas, like wounds disguised as art. She hummed while she worked, but it was a hollow sound, empty of melody. I, meanwhile, went back to the company. There was comfort in the predictability of it, in the endless rhythm of work and deadlines. But sometimes, when I caught my reflection in the glass walls, I barely recognized the woman staring back, eyes to sharp, face to calm. One afternoon, I found a letter on my desk. No name, no handwriting I recognized. Just a small folded page that smelled faintly of rain. It read, "You can build love from the wreckage of another's heart. Some debts are paid in silence." No signature, but I didn't need one. That evening, I went to the river. The water was calm now, silver beneath the fading light. I stood at the edge, my shoes sinking slightly into the wet sand. The breeze carried the faint scent of smoke from the nearby village, burning wood, cooking fires, life continuing as mine quietly collapsed. I dropped the letter into the water and watched it drift away, dissolving word by word. Behind me, I thought I heard a voice, low, familiar. I turned, but there was only the wind. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw him, standing at the far end of the shore, still and silent, like the memory of a man who never fully left. And then he was gone. That night, the house caught fire. No flames, no smoke, not the kind you can see, but something in the air changed. Sophie's laughter returned, brittle and wild. Old arguments resurfaced, unprovoked. The walls, once white, seemed to dim under the weight of what we refused to bury. I realized then that fire isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's revelation, a slow burning from the inside out, until everything false collapses and only truth remains. And the truth was simple. Father had built a house of wealth. Sophie had filled it with desire. Jack had walked in and struck a match. But it was me who watched it burn, quietly, deliberately, because maybe some things need to turn to ash before they can ever feel clean again. I didn't smell smoke that night, yet I knew something was ending. It wasn't the house, or Sophie, or even the ghost of Jack. It was me, the version of myself that still believed survival was the same as living. The air felt sharp, metallic. A storm hovered somewhere beyond the horizon, waiting for permission. Sophie had gone to bed hours earlier, her laughter echoing faintly from her room, haunting refrain. I stayed in Father's study, the lamp flickering over the edge of an old contract he'd once signed in bloodless ink. It was a promise to build, not to love, and I'd inherited both the wealth and the emptiness that came with it. The clock ticked past midnight, then the phone rang. At first, I thought it was nothing, a wrong number, another ghost pretending to be memory. But when I picked it up, the line hummed with rain and static. And beneath it, a voice I knew far too well. "Ellen," I froze. It wasn't possible. "Ellen," the voice said again, softer this time, tired. "I shouldn't have come back, Jack." My voice broke on the word, fragile as glass. "Where are you?" A pause. The faint hiss of water, maybe wind. "Not far." "Why?" I asked. "Why now? Why after all of this?" "Because the truth has teeth," he said. "And it's already bitten everyone it can." The line clicked. Silence. I stood there for a long time, the receiver heavy in my hand, the sound of my own heartbeat louder than the rain outside. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I followed instinct instead of reason. The roads were empty, the city washed pale beneath the storm. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to move, to reach the end of whatever thread had begun unraveling months ago. The river lay ahead, silver in the lightning, dark in the spaces between. And there, on the far bank, stood a figure, soaked, still, waiting. Jack. He looked like something carved from the night itself. His clothes clung to him, his face gaunt, eyes hollowed by secrets he couldn't carry any more. I stepped out of the car, the rain soaking through my coat. "You're supposed to be dead," he almost smiled. I was, for a while. "What do you want?" My voice trembled, though I stood straighter than I felt. "To tell you," he said quietly, "what your father did. What I was meant to do. Don't," I whispered, "don't rewrite the story now." "I'm not rewriting it," he said. "I'm finishing it." He took a step closer. The air between us smelled of rain and iron, the scent of truth coming undone. "Your father owed people, dangerous people," he said. "He borrowed from them to build the company, to build everything you and Sophie grew up believing was legacy. When he couldn't pay, they sent me. I was supposed to destroy what was left, take the money, the estate, everything. But then I met you," he exhaled, shaking his head. "You were the first thing I wanted to protect. And that's how I failed both of you." Lightning tore through the sky, a split-second photograph of the moment everything broke. "You lied to us," I said, my voice cold, steady. "You came into our lives as a weapon and called it fate. I tried to stop it," he said, "but Sophie found out. She was desperate, furious. The night of the accident, she tried to leave. I followed her. She grabbed the wheel. The car went into the river. I thought she was dead. I thought it would be mercy if I was too." The words fell like stones into the water between us. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to forgive him. But both felt too small for what this was. He looked at me, rain dripping from his lashes. "I came back to tell you, because someone else will come looking. The debt doesn't die with the debtor." I stared past him at the water, dark and endless. "And you think I'll save you?" "No," he said softly. "I think you already did." When I returned home, Sophie was awake. She was sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by paintings, half finished, color bleeding into color like wounds that refused to close. Her eyes were rimmed red, her voice barely a whisper. "I heard the phone," she said. "Was it him?" "Yes." She didn't ask how. She just nodded, as if she'd been expecting the answer her whole life. Then she said something that gutted me. "Maybe we deserved him." I wanted to argue, but the truth sat heavy between us. We had both loved him, in different ways, for different reasons. He had been the mirror we each used to see ourselves, her chaos, my control. He reflected what we refused to admit. Sophie looked up at me, tears glinting in the half-light. "Do you think he'll come back?" "No," I said. "Not really. Some people never leave, but they don't return either." She nodded, and for the first time, I saw her not as my rival, but as the girl she once was, barefoot, laughing, chasing sunlight through father's garden. Dawn came quietly. The rain had stopped, the sky bruised with early light. I walked outside, barefoot, the ground cool and damp beneath me. Smoke from the village fires drifted faintly through the trees. The house behind me stood silent, exhausted, but still standing. In the distance, the river glimmered like a secret keeping its promise. I thought of father, of his empire built on borrowed faith. I thought of Sophie, who wanted too much and lost more. And of Jack, who came as a storm and left as a ghost. Every story has an ending. Ours had several, all of them unfinished. But as I watched the sun climb through the haze, I realized something father had never taught us. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you let go of. And maybe, just maybe, letting go was the only kind of freedom that ever mattered. That morning, I went back inside and called the lawyer. "I'm selling the company," I said. "All of it." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Madam Harrison, it's your father's. No, I said quietly. It was my father's burden. It doesn't have to be mine. When I hung up, Sophie was standing at the foot of the stairs, watching me. She didn't say a word. She just nodded once, small, slow, as if she'd been waiting for this too. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees, the air smelled clean, new. Somewhere in the distance, a car door shut, faint, unfamiliar, then faded into the hum of morning traffic. Maybe it was memory, maybe it was goodbye. Either way, I didn't turn to look.